Happy No Comic Book Day, comic geeks, and welcome back to a Script Heroes bonus episode. It is time again for the strange Saturday Super Show. Today we are talking about Space Riders Volume 1 from Black Mask Publishing. The artist on this is Alexis Zirit. He's best known for work on Space Riders, obviously, Tarantula, and Night Hunters. The writer here is Fabian Rangel Jr. of Samurai Jack, Five Ghosts, and TMNT Amazing Adventures. And our letterer is Ryan Ferrier. Space Riders is a wild one.
It is a wild one. It is like Acid Trip the comic.
Exactly. Like,
And
it's not
we
something
both-
where I would say that the plot itself would necessarily say Strange Saturday Super Show, but the
No.
just gorgeous and trippy ass visuals of it
and
fully
there are
make it
things
strange.
that come in like just Space Whale, and then it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's yeah, there we go.
It's certainly, I mean, with art like that, it's gonna be weird.
Yeah.
Just inherently. So this is the story of Capitan Peligro, who is a space rider captain who has been stabbed in the eye.
You said Captain, so I had to go Capitan.
Yeah, Capitan.
Capitan.
This is his name, Capitan Peligro. We love him in this house. He's been stabbed in the eye whilst on a mission and has been grounded for a full year. When he comes back, he's full of anger and resentment and a drive to like just kick the universe's ass. With his new crew, which consists of a nerdy ass robot and a religious monkey.
Yara and Mono.
They head across the galaxy, running into trouble more so than looking for it. They battle with a mercenary named Satanus, who's working for some dark, unknown force. They clash with barbarians on a just random planet, and then they defend the bodies of the space gods to preserve, goodness in the universe. It's pretty wacky. It's very much a trip to read through.
Yeah.
Jay, how did you feel about it?
It's a strange one. It's a strange one. I'll start to say we both have read the second volume prior to this, which is a weird way to approach a new property. Weirdly, I mean, it's been a while since I read the second volume. I think the second volume is even stranger than the first volume is.
It definitely is.
But yeah, it's a weird book to, I guess, to discuss, because you kind of ran through the plot a little bit, and like you mentioned the setup of like, okay, he's like grounded for a year, and then he gets this team, and then I think the thing is he has to complete like 3 missions according to the regulations, and then he'll be good to go. And the weird thing about this is that the year is like immediately jumped over, and then like he seems confused that like when the year is up, he's like given another chance despite that was told to him like immediately before. And then they make a big deal out of like the complete 3 missions with all the, like regulations intact. And then they're not really like counting missions completed throughout. It's not like there's like a progress to that. So like the plot is, I think it's a solid plot conceptually, but I don't know if they ever really like commit to actually like following through on their plot points. But there's some fun stuff, and it's I think I enjoy the art more than because I am occasionally confused by the art. Like if I actually like really look at a page, I'll always be able to set it, but there are sometimes that I'll go through a page and then have to like go back because I'll be like, wait a minute, how did they all get? Oh no, they're not all in the same place. The people were breaking through into the ship. That's just one I remember when like the person like landed on top of the ship and like broke his way in. Where I was like really confused for a second. I was like, wait, weren't they just in a ship? And now in this fight, and it's like, oh, he kind of came in. So the art is occasionally confusing. The story is occasionally confusing, but I think on a like foundational level, both are interesting and intriguing. So I find myself very like I don't know, torn on this book, I guess, and how I feel about it.
It reminds me a bit of when we tried to have like a discussion about May's book, where it's like, oh,
Yeah,
this is the type of book that's like the like meat of the book is the reading of the book. Like it's
yeah.
such like a experiential
It's
read.
not like it's not like the lore to dive into, or like the the plot points.
Exactly. Which is, like we said with May's book, not a bad thing at all. It just makes it a little difficult to like pull things out to discuss. I mean, if are you in general a big sci-fi guy?
Weirdly, I feel like I've been cast a lot as a sci-fi writer, despite the fact that I don't read. It's like I write a lot of sci-fi.
Hmm.
But I mean, obviously, Green Lantern is sci-fi, and that's like what I've read the most of in my
Green
days.
Lantern is above all else superhero, though,
Yeah, I mean, it's your like intergalactic stuff.
for sure.
Let me think. I've read certain sci-fi, like they only find them when they're dead, right? That
Hmm.
I think that's the title of that book. Like I've read some sci-fi indie books, but I wouldn't say that I'm like a sci-fi aficionado.
That's so fair. I would not describe myself as such either, but I feel like it pulls a lot of like very iconic sci-fi visuals
Yeah,
in this book, which is super fun. Uh, it just feels super like visually campy in the best way a lot of the times. Like they're flying around in this giant skull. It's like the Santa Muerte,
I do
which
love
is
the skull ship. It's
it's
very
so
cool.
wild. The robot lady shoots lasers out of her boobs at one point. It's there's just all of these little like bits of, oh, this is a bit of a romp, huh? We're just having fun out in space right now, aren't we? And you gotta love it. I mean, the fact that the final battle of the book and the like emotional climax of the book was them abandoning their spaceships and just sort of floating towards each other and then grappling and then floating apart a little bit. As much as I found it a bit anticlimactic, uh, it was still very like, we're having fun in space here, making them wrestle
Yeah,
in zero gravity. But to hit on that, it was a bit of a disappointing end to the book, and I would love to actually dive into the whole Hammerhead bit. Hammerhead
yeah,
was Capitan Peligro's previous first mate, who was corrupted by this kind of like ethereal evil in the universe. So he turned on the Capitan and ended up stabbing him in the eye, which is what then led to him being out of commission for a year. And he comes back as a mercenary working alongside Satanis. And I feel like he wasn't given enough emotional weight.
fully agree. That was one of the main things I felt like I wanted more out of that relationship. Like I wanted to feel that, like, rivals, friends, like
Mm-hmm.
rivals, that like feud that would just feed everything, where you just feel like these two people are at their core just the bitterest of rivals, and the most important thing is the rivalry. And that wasn't super there. Like we get told the first mate stuff, and like we get all of the characters' backstories. I want to say in the second issue. I'm not really remembering exactly
Mm-hmm.
what issue it was, and I remember just sitting there, like when I was reading those and going, like, I don't think these did anything. Like, I don't know why we got these backstories except to be like, these are where these characters came from. If instead we use those flashbacks to like establish their relationship as friends better, I think that would have been a more like logical use of flashback. And then my other thing, kind of minor, but like they do the whole thing playing of like, he kills him with the knife that he stabbed him in the eye. I am shocked that they didn't have him stab him in the eye. Like he
It
stabbed him in the throat instead
was,
of the eye, and it was like
and before
missed
that, he stabs him in
opportunity.
the stomach, which is like fine, but it felt like it was right there, right?
I felt it coming. Like I get subversion, but that just felt like that moment that you want, that you feel coming, and you're like, oh yes, okay, here you go, in the eye, same way, and it just doesn't happen. And he pins him to like this floating rock by the throat, which is like, you talked about the final encounter being a little bit anticlimactic. That final visual, like we get a splash of it, and it's just like it's not the coolest or the most like thematic death. So I'm just kind of left there being like, this doesn't feel like that epic kill moment to me.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a an unfortunate pattern throughout a lot of the book, where the art is stunning and wild and wonderful, but I don't know that action is always conveyed the best. There are a
No, you
couple
mentioned the
of,
like them just floating while like holding each other through space in the big climactic battle, and it's like, oh
and it felt like we got like a lot of impact moments during fights. Like it's a lot of like, you know, leg extended enemies, neck snap to the side, pow moments. But it felt like we never really were like in the combat. Because we have basically two physical fights. The first one being when the mercenaries break into Santa Muerte and Mono takes them out. And then the other one when they land on the barbarian planet and Yara fights a bunch of them off. And both of those fights were a little underwhelming. They really felt like we were seeing them from kind of far back as opposed to being like down in the action with them.
yeah,
And that was a bit of
I
a bummer.
agree. Because like I felt like the builds to almost every fight were really cool. Like we would
Mm-hmm.
see like when the tribal locals were like coming at their ship, like you see them charging in and you're getting excited for this cool fight scene, and then it just like doesn't really hit. And I think one of the things, like you mentioned the impact moments, which is absolutely true, but I think the other thing is just the this book doesn't seem to ever want to capture a small moment. Like it is
Mm-mm.
almost always big panels, few panels per page, big moments, big splashes, big close-ups. Like very rarely does it seem like this book is willing to give you like the in-between shots or like the progression stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're not getting a 9 panel grid of a character fighting off a horde in this book. And that I think when you're setting up, especially because they set up a lot of the fights with like multiple enemies and
Yeah.
you have multiple protagonists, like you're getting these mob fights, and when you're doing mob fights in these big pages that typically make more sense for like a one-on-one fight or something like that, it just doesn't work as well because you don't get as much like time to do everything, so you can only do the impact moments, which doesn't always work out well.
What I will say is that I think it works really well for the spaceship combat, though. I
It
love a
does.
lot of the space combat because the this book is like a very it's such a good like creative expression book. Like the amount
Yeah.
of like again kind of campy sci-fi vibes of like, you know, tractor beams and lasers and stuff like that. They look great, especially coming out of Santa Muerte. The skull ships like shooting eye beams and stuff
Yeah,
to take
yeah, yeah.
things out. There was a really great moment in before the mercenary broke into Santa Muerte where they show the ship just destroying two people who are floating in space, and we get these
Oh yeah,
really
that was
cool
awesome. The one's like
visuals of them
incinerated
like
into bones and the other one's like blown up.
into
Yeah,
viscera. It's great, uh, and so I think that the combat style works so well for that really zoomed out type of
fully agree.
combat. But
Fully
then when
agree.
it comes into the closer styles of combat, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with all the reasons that it suffers a little bit. Um, and I think that that translates a bit to the emotional beats of the book as well. Uh,
Fully.
like you were saying with the flashbacks, we kind of run through them. Both Mono and Yar get like a little one page flashback to explain where they're from. But the way that that's written into the plot is they've crashed on this barbarian planet. This barbarian woman has saved them from the horde. And she's like, okay, my magic is going to take all night to do. Let's like have a chit chat. And then the chit chat is basically just those two pages of flashback, and it's like, okay, this feels a little shoehorned in, like.
Yeah, it's I think in general the dialogue can be quite on the nose in this book.
Mhm.
Like there's a moment in the final issue where Peligro's like talking to the two of them, and he's like, "You both have earned my trust now. Like I trust you now, and we're all good." And I'm like, that could have been done in a way that
So
was less like just telling us exactly what you want us to have picked up on.
and it's
Um,
like the way that he does it, he's like, "You've both earned my trust because Mono, you fought off that guy that broke into the ship, and Yar,
yeah,
you fought off those barbarians. So I trust you now." And that
yeah,
means, and then he's like cut off before there can be any sort of actual like emotional resolution to that
yeah,
because they like jump into a wormhole or something. And it's like, okay, I feel like again, maybe the pacing of this book didn't do it any favors. Like they were trying to be super breakneck in a way that just kind of left things unfinished and unfulfilled.
yeah. I agree. There's certain pieces like you mentioned the emotion, like there's certain moments that work. Like when I think it's in Palingo's like flashback earlier on, which I didn't love most of, it, but like the end of that when he's like given the gun in the coffin, and it's like we get this nice shot of the two of them, and then close ups on the coffin closed and then opened with the gun,
Mm-hmm.
and like that worked so well, and I think that plays to like what this book does well sometimes, which is like when you do only have a couple of characters, I think they manage to succeed at some of those emotional moments, and a lot of that comes from what I think this book is best at, which is design. And I'm not talking about
Yes.
just art, like design of characters, of items, of worlds, of certain groups. Like you have this gun that's in a coffin, you have this headship that's a skull. All of their suits are detailed and interesting in unique ways, and
Even the
the different
choices to
planets.
make the a number of the other space riders into like kind of animal people. Like Mono is a full, I think, baboon.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that what type of monkey that is?
I
He's like a
believe he is a
full
baboon.
baboon, and it looks great. And there's
Yeah,
like a colonel or someone or a general or something who's a like tiger with a metal jaw. It's
yeah,
super
yeah.
rad.
That's the guy who gives him the gun, I believe, right? So that's the
Yeah.
same. Yeah, yeah.
It's like all of the design choices in this book so good, and really just like beautiful. It's wild to have such a kind of hodgepodge group of ideas of like, okay, here's our space whale, here's our tribe of barbarians, here's our like very human hero, here's his robot, here's his monkey sidekick, uh, which is dismissive of Mono and Yara's roles, but whatever. And to have it all feel so cohesive, I think, is such a testament to Zirit's style because it all feels like it belongs in the same book. And to I guess kind of piggyback off of myself there, I would love to talk about the coloring on this book because it
The
is bombastic.
I think that's like if you were to get people who have read Space Route, like I feel like that's they'll just if you like close your eyes and think about the book, it's just the colors that
Mm-hmm.
like weirdly stick. Like that is what makes this book what it is. That's what plays into the acid trip feel of it
Yes.
because it has that like I feel like that classic coloring for either comics or movies or whatever is like when somebody goes on like an acid trip or like some sort of crazy hallucination. This is kind of what you make it look like, but this
Yeah.
whole book looks like that. That's not like a tool. That's just what this book looks like. Everything's like every
Yellow
background
and
is like yellow
pink.
or pink for like no like well for tonal reasons but like no logical reason. It is yellow, it is pink. Characters are often silhouetted in blue instead of in black, which is really cool. um yeah, so I think that's what it's a lot of like pink and yellow. I think are like the main backgrounds, and then characters are blued out a lot, sometimes redded out for the I think the villains are
Mm-hmm.
redded out and the heroes are blued out in like silhouettes, which
Yeah.
is a cool way to do that like good evil kind of feel.
And it is, despite being such like incredible vibrant colors, it is like a very limited color palette as well,
Yeah.
which is super cool and helps make the whole book feel so cohesive. So even though they're not like, being conservative with their colors, because the choices are certainly anything but, uh, it is like a very, there's probably only like maybe 10 colors
Yeah.
I'm trying to
And
like
like
mentally run through.
and the I think it's probably like what's it, eight is eight tone, like the old school coloring. I think like it's probably
Hmm.
whatever that is, which I think is eight. Um and the other thing is like the pages aren't white. The pages are this like muddied, like that, like
Yeah,
when you were a kid and you made like a treasure map and like you like teabagged it to like make it that like
not the
brownish
phrase to use
old
there, but
paper. That's what you did. That's how that worked.
not the word that I would use though.
It's an accurate word. Like that's what this paper is. It's like that like
Yeah,
fake aged browned paper to make it look old, which is really cool. It's just a nice little
right.
touch to like give this book a certain effect and a certain feel to it,
It
which is like that
reminds
kind of classic sci-fi, old school comic book
it reminds
vibe.
me a bit of what Morning Star is doing right now, where
Absolutely.
they're like really intentionally trying to make it feel like an artifact of the time that they're trying to produce. And that's such a good call out that they're doing that with the pages here because it does add to the tone so much. And I feel like if the pages were to be white, like having that kind of stark white would fuck up a lot of the vibes. Like
It was.
it would make it feel so grounded and like pagey
I
instead
couldn't
of
imagine a bright white like behind
right.
these panels. I think that'd be real weird.
It would be so weird. So like amazing just like attention to detail to make the page backgrounds that kind
Very
of
cool.
aged paper. Um yeah, super cool, very very creative. Uh with a book like this where it's a very like experiential book. Uh
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily going to ding it for any sort of you know, well, I'll dig it a little bit for like kind of plot problems, and I think we've touched on the way that the characters are written in a
Yeah.
kind of tell not show way in terms of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
their emotional states and stuff, um, or at least their relationships. I think they did a good job with like the individual characterization though,
I agree.
like uh Peligro is very much present on the page, personality in your face. I think that the way that they did Mono was super cool. I do wish that they tied into or that they had tied up his religious side a bit more with like
Yeah, we
the
get his like spiritual like praying to his
which is so cool because he looks
yeah.
super cool when he does it and he has these like rad little prayers that he does, but then we see the gods and I wish that we got a little bit more from him there, but other than that he's like really well done on the pages himself. We got a fun little kind of, I don't know, heel turn with Yara where she at first seems like a complete kind of, for lack of a better term, like kind of corporate drone. Like she's the reason that he gets well, you know, she's running a psych eval on him when he thinks she's just like a med bot.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, she's very much the kind of buttoned up, uh, ready to follow orders type of robot. And then in the end, she like tells Peligro to go fuck him up about Hammerhead. And there's a great reaction shot from Mono there. It's like, oh yeah, we do get a little bit of growth from her, which you love to see.
Yeah, there's
So I
definitely
think
some
that
good
individuals
character
they were well
moments.
done.
Yeah, I like I think they're all very uh they all have very clear characterization, and that with the designs that are so like everybody feels, or at least everybody on the protagonist side feels very thought out and developed, and like they actually exist in this world. I
Hmm.
think Hammerhead could probably have gotten a little bit more of that.
Yeah,
um but no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that they did a great job with making the characters just come across really strong for the limited time that you have with them.
yeah. It's only 4 issues. I should toss
Yes,
out there.
only four.
I didn't mention that up top. But yeah, they do such a good job with that individual character work. Like you mentioned, the villains are a bit left wanting. Especially when we're looking at Hammerhead. In the end, when he's stabbed, he kind of turns again and he's like, "Oh, you were my best friend. Let me warn you about this like thing that's to come." And I'm like, "Okay." I feel like we didn't get enough time with him as the like first mate for his betrayal to feel particularly strong. And then we also didn't really get enough time with him as the enemy for his
Yeah,
turncoating there to like tattle on the force of evil to feel
agreed.
really strong. So I think that he suffered from a bit of expositionitis.
Yeah, I think flashbacks or something to give us more time with him as the first mate would
Mhm.
have really benefited this book. Like I really would have liked something like that.
Especially because what I really liked was uh one, that opening sequence, which is a flashback, essentially, or I guess not a flashback, it just starts there and then jumps forward. Um, where he's like kind of floating through space is super rad, and then being evaluated, I thought that was really, really well done. But then when Yara comes to pick uh, Peligro up after the 1 year is up, one of the other like stipulations for him being reinstated as a space rider is like you're not allowed to go after your first mate. And I
Yeah.
wish that that had a little bit more meat to it because I don't think in that opening sequence we get the sense that it was his first mate betraying him. Uh,
Yeah, no,
at
I don't
least
think
I
we
didn't.
really do at all. No, it feels more like you can't like get your first mate to be your first mate again. At least that's how I
Exactly.
read it.
Me too.
Um that's what's like I really like the opening up until that little sequence and I like conceptually the opening as a whole, but that Yara like confronting him just I don't think was done perfectly because one, he
Mhm.
seems so confused despite the fact that he was told in a year he would be brought back.
I
And
think the
then she just
confusion
dumps a
is
lot
because
on
he
him
thought that
that
he was
isn't.
gonna like go right back and he's in this like trial period, maybe.
I guess it felt weird. And then the other thing is like she just sets up all of this stuff that doesn't come back as you would expect it to. Like the specific number of you have to do 3 missions. Like doesn't really get touched on again after that. You can't go after your first mate. Barely kind of gets played with after that.
You have
You
to
have to follow
follow
the
the rules.
regulations. Like that it comes back at the very end as like a reason why he wouldn't be reinstated, but like it's not there throughout where like listen, every
And
time
like
you're about to break the regulations, like don't do because like that would have been if it's like don't do nope. We're gonna keep playing by the rules and getting us, and that's gonna make it more tough until finally there's that moment with his first mate where he's like, "Nope, I'm gonna break the rules," and that's when you have Yara tell him go fuck him up instead of
yeah,
pulling him back from breaking the rules. Like everything's there, the pieces are all there to do something
exactly.
like that. And that's what makes this such an interesting book because there's a lot of really cool ideas and setup, and there's even great execution of some of those ideas and setup. There's
Hmm.
just other things where I'm like, if we just got these little other things, even better, be awesome.
It's one of those things where you said it a little bit with the like stabbing in the eye thing, where it's like I feel like it's not that these things necessarily needed to happen, but it's that the groundwork was there for them to happen.
Yes.
So it feels like we're missing these things when they don't happen.
Yeah, it feels like we get the setup without the payoff for some
Yeah.
of the stuff. Like you read enough comic books and like, listen, subversion's always great when it's like intended subversion and it makes
Hmm.
sense and they pivot you. But sometimes you just like you're reading and you're like you're getting ready for that thing that comes when these things happen. And then it's not subversion because they're not like pivoting. They just
Hmm.
don't do it and you're left like, "Oh, I was getting excited for that."
And like the gun was built up. It's like called the Ghost Maker or something, which is so
I love
badass.
the gun. The
And like
gun's
we have the
cool.
very like emotionally poignant flashback of your father is dead. He would have wanted you to have this gun, and then he threatens to use it on uh some people, but then he like never actually ends up using it in a way that feels emotionally fulfilling or something. And I'm like, oh come on, another kind of setup without payoff.
That one I'm a little bit more willing to let go because I know there's like future installments and I'm like that's something that you can set up and like kind of let dangle more than the other things. But I agree with you when it's like put on top of the other things you're like,
Hmm.
there's all these cool kind of moments of setup and we don't get payoff too many of them, which is unfortunate, but
it's at the end of the day, it's a book that has such a strong personality to it, and I think
yes,
that's where it just
absolutely.
really, really,
It's a vibe.
really shines.
It's
It
its own vibe, and
it
that's
is like the definition of a vibe.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
like I think that throughout history, you could pass this down, and people would use the word vibe to describe it. Yeah, it's a
In
vibe.
10,000 years, somebody will find this book and be like, you know what? That was a vibe.
That's a vibe, and it's such a good vibe too.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah, I really enjoyed it. Again, we had already read volume 2 for whatever
Yeah.
reason. Which is silly because we also it's not like we read volume 2 together. We had both just
No, we both read
independently
volume.
only
I've
read
also read
volume
the
2.
first issue of volume 3. But I
Very
read the.
weird.
I believe I read the
So
first issue of volume 3 before I read volume 2. So I've really just read this book in the weirdest
the
order.
weirdest possible order. But yeah, it really carries itself as such a distinct thing. And that's its true strength. Absolutely.
Yes.
Do you have any closing thoughts
I
on
don't know if I have any
space
closing thoughts.
riders?
I thought the giant, dead space god body was really cool. I like
Super,
that.
super cool. And the space whale was so cool too.
The
We
space
love a
whale was
space
great. Yeah.
whale.
Most
We've
of the
talked
like
about
the
this with
space
Melville
scenery,
from Sinister
great.
Sons.
Yeah, yeah. Space scenery was really that was like the thing where I was like all the like weird stuff in space. It'd be like, man, who comes up with the idea to put this in space? I'm like, books since this have redone this, which is wild because like
Oh,
space
space
whale,
whale is
boom,
like I think space whale's a pretty common
yeah,
sci-fi
space
trope.
whale's on that, but like giant god body in space has been done again, which is
We only
wild.
find them when they're dead, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's a vibe. That's really what I have to say about this book.
It's
It's
just chock
strange.
full of good
It's certainly
ideas.
strange, and
Certainly.
yeah, I don't know.
It was a
I enjoyed it.
trip
You
to
got
read.
yeah, you got anything else? If not,
I
I
do
guess
not.
we'll start wrapping up here. Quick little disclaimer: we didn't have an episode go up on Wednesday because our technology kind of screwed itself, and we're hoping
Oops.
to get that up at some point. So that episode will go up when it's ready, just regardless of schedule.
Mhm.
Hopefully before the next full episode comes out, but
Fingers
who
crossed.
knows? Fingers crossed on that front.
But in any
So yeah,
case,
sorry about that. Um, but yeah, that will be up at some point. And right now, you could check out the episode before that, other bonus episodes, the full playlist of Strange Saturday Super Shows will be linked. We've got a boatload of them at this point, I think. So
oh yeah, like
yeah,
6 or 7, 8 even.
yeah, something. I don't know if it's 8. I think 6 or 7 is probably the
Yeah.
correct ballpark.
But whether or not last week's episode is up, next week we'll have an episode on Wednesday as usual. Again, fingers crossed. There shouldn't be any problems with the tech next week. So that should be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But until then, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, Comic Geeks.